They say ink on paper is just crushed pigment mixed with oil, dried until it sits flat against wood pulp. It's simple chemistry. A child can understand it. But when a state notary public pulls an official ledger from a steel cabinet, looks at a signature bearing your name, and then looks up at you with her face drained white as bone, ink has nothing to do with it. That's when ink turns into something else entirely. That's when the ground beneath your feet opens up without making a single sound. My name is Howard Miller. I'm 63 years old. I worked 34 of those years as a senior land surveyor and county boundary inspector for the Department of Public Works. That means I spent my entire adult life looking at lines, the invisible, legally binding borders that separate one man's timberland from another man's farm. I know what an official brass survey cap looks like when it's been driven 4 feet into granite. I know the sound a steel chain makes when you pull it taut across damp clay, and I know that a discrepancy of 6 inches on a property plat can turn 2 quiet neighbors into blood enemies overnight. You get an eye for precision over 34 years. You learn that when a line is drawn wrong on a map, everything built on top of it eventually tilts until the whole structure comes crashing down. I thought I knew my own life the exact same way. I lived in a 3-story brick farmhouse built in 1912, sitting on 42 acres of prime pasture and black walnut timber at the edge of Oak Creek Township. Wrapped porch, slate roof, and a red cedar barn my grandfather raised with his own hands back before the first paved road was cut through the valley. My wife, Sarah, passed away 5 years ago after a long quiet battle with heart failure that left the big front parlor feeling far too dark and far too still. I stayed on the land because every acre held her footsteps. The row of wild blueberry bushes she'd planted behind the pump house, the hand-carved oak workbench in the tractor shed, and the stone fireplace where we'd sat together through 36 winters. Our son, Julian, was 36. He was a senior partner at a regional commercial investment firm downtown, sharp, impeccably groomed, hyper-ambitious, and married to a woman named Brenda whom I'd spent 8 years trying to respect and 6 years trying to endure. Brenda called herself an estate portfolio manager, which, near as I could tell from her designer clothes and expensive leased German sports cars, meant she helped wealthy people reroute their assets through private offshore trusts so the tax collector couldn't touch them. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday morning in mid-November when I drove my '04 pickup truck down to the Municipal Administration Building on Main Street. I wasn't there for anything dramatic. It was a simple routine errand, the kind of dull paperwork a retired widower handles on a quiet weekday morning. I needed to notarize a basic county agricultural tax exemption form for the lower 20 acres of pasture. It was a form I filled out every 3 years to keep the land assessed at farm use rates rather than commercial development rates. It saved me about $1,400 a year in property taxes, and all it required was my signature, a $5 state fee, and the official seal of a licensed notary public. I walked into the county clerk's office at 9:15. The room smelled of wet wool coats, old paper, and floor wax. Behind the glass counter sat a woman named Martha Gable. Martha was 61, wearing wire-rimmed glasses attached to a silver chain around her neck, a thick knitted cardigan, and a gold pin on her lapel marking 30 years of service to the county. I'd known Martha since high school. She'd notarized my marriage license in 1985, my tractor loan paperwork in 1998, and Sarah's death certificate 5 years ago. She was a woman who lived by the book, knew every state statute regarding land titles by heart, and treated her official notary stamp like it was a sacred trust. "Morning, Martha," I said, stepping up to the counter and setting my canvas hat on the wood ledge. "Howard," Martha smiled, her eyes crinkling behind her spectacles. "You're out early on a soggy morning. What can I do for you today?" "Just the usual agricultural exemption renewal for the South 40, I said, pulling the folded white form from my coat pocket and sliding it across the counter along with my driver's license and a crisp $5 bill. "Need you to witness my mark so I can drop it in the tax assessor's box down the hall." "Easy enough," Martha said, pulling her reading glasses down her nose. "Sign it right on the bottom line there, Howard, and I'll pull up your master tax parcel file in the ledger just to make sure the legal description matches the updated township map." I picked up the black ballpoint pen chained to the counter, signed my name, Howard E. Miller, in the slow, steady cursive I'd used since I was 18 years old, and pushed the paper back to her. Martha picked up the form, verified my driver's license, and turned toward the row of heavy green steel filing cabinets lining the wall behind her desk. She unlocked the middle drawer with a small brass key from her sweater pocket, pulled out a thick, leather-bound master parcel ledger for Oak Creek Township, and carried it back to the counter. She flipped through the yellowed pages, her index finger tracing down the column of parcel numbers until she reached Section 14, Lot 8, the legal designation for my 42 acres. She stopped. Her finger froze on the page. I watched her face. I've seen men look at broken transit levels, collapsed bridges, and washed-out roads, but I had never seen a woman's face turn the color of wet chalk in 3 seconds flat. Martha's eyes widened behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. The rain tapped softly against the high-arched windows of the clerk's office, but inside the room, the silence turned thick and suffocating. "Martha?" I asked, leaning slightly over the counter. "Is there a typo in the parcel description? Did the county renumber the township grid again?" Martha didn't answer right away. She slowly raised her head, looking at me over the top of her spectacles. Her lower lip gave a tiny, involuntary twitch. Her hands, resting on the edges of the heavy leather ledger, were trembling so hard that the thick paper rustled against the wood. "Howard," Martha whispered, her voice barely above a raspy croak. "Did you bring a power of attorney form in here last month?" I frowned, thrown off by the odd question. Power of attorney? No. Why would I need a power of attorney? I'm 63, I work my own timber, and my mind is as sharp as a tack. I haven't been in this office since I paid my road assessment back in March. Martha swallowed hard, her throat working like she was trying to choke down dry sand. She carefully turned the heavy leather ledger around so the open page faced me, slid it across the counter, and pointed a shaking finger at an official document stapled into the county registry pocket. It was a certified state form titled, Irrevocable General Power of Attorney and Complete Real Property Assignment. The form declared that I, Howard E. Miller, being of unsound mind and failing physical health, surrendered all legal administrative authority, land management rights, and property title control over my 42 acres to my son, Julian Miller, and his wife, Brenda Miller. At the bottom of the form was a dark blue signature, Howard E. Miller. Next to the signature was an official state notary seal, stamped in black ink, bearing a registration number and a signature from a private mobile notary service based downtown. And the date stamped on the document was October 14th, exactly 4 weeks ago. I stared at the paper. The blue ink of the signature looked fresh, thick, and perfectly executed. The loops on the H, the sharp slant on the M, the small dot above the I, it looked like my handwriting. It looked like the signature I'd put on my driver's license, my tax returns, and my wife's headstone contract. Except I had never seen that document in my entire life. "Martha," I breathed, my throat closing up so tight I could barely push the words out. "I didn't sign this. I've never seen this paper before in my life." Martha leaned closer across the counter, her face deathly pale, her voice dropping into a raspy, terrifying whisper that chilled me to the bone. "Howard," Martha whispered, pointing to a small, red administrative slip attached to the back of the form. "This document wasn't just filed. It was recorded with the county land registry 3 weeks ago. Under this filing, your son took out a $2 million commercial equity mortgage against your farm, and the bank released the funds to his firm 4 days ago." I stood in front of the glass counter, my vision blurring slightly around the edges as my mind tried to bridge the gap between 34 years of honest public service and the document sitting in front of me. $2 million. That wasn't just money. That was 42 acres of black walnut timber, 3 generations of sweat, and the red cedar barn my grandfather had built before the roads were even paved. It was everything Sarah and I had worked for, collateralized like a cheap stack of casino chips to fund Julian's downtown investment portfolio. "Howard, sit down," Martha said, her voice shaking as she unlatched the counter door and brought a wooden folding chair around to the front. "Sit down before you drop." I didn't sit down. When a transit tripod slips on wet shale, you don't sit down to watch it slide into the ravine. You plant your boots, you grab the frame, and you hold on with everything you've got. Martha, I said, my voice coming out low and dry as winter grass. Who certified that notary stamp on the bottom of the page? Martha reached down, pulled out her magnifying glass, and adjusted her reading spectacles. She leaned over the heavy ledger, tracing the black ink seal with the tip of her pen. It's a mobile notary registration out of the county seat, Martha said, reading the fine print stamped around the state crest. Registration number 88-412. Name is listed as Vane and Associates Legal Document Services. The signatory is a woman named Brenda Miller. The room went entirely still. Brenda, I whispered. My daughter-in-law. She's a licensed state notary public, Howard, Martha explained, her face grim. Under state code, a notary can certify signatures on power of attorney transfers, deeds, and land assignments. If the notary stamp is active and registered with the Secretary of State, the county clerk's office has no choice but to record the document as legally binding. She forged my mark, Martha, I said, pointing a calloused finger directly at the dark blue ink on the page. Look at the loop on that E. I've drawn legal land plats for 34 years. I make a sharp 45-degree break on the crossbar of my E. This loop is rounded. It was copied off a photocopier or traced off an old check. I believe you, Howard, Martha said softly, looking up at me with eyes full of sorrow and decades of shared history. I know your hand better than my own husband's. But as far as the county land registry and the commercial mortgage bank are concerned, this paper is real. Under docket 2026, B. Julian holds total administrative authority over your property. He can sell the timber rights, he can subdivide the pasture, or he can let the bank foreclose if the loan defaults. I turned toward the high arched windows, looking out at the cold November rain streaming down the glass. My son. The boy I'd taught to split cedar logs behind the woodshop. The boy I'd carried on my shoulders across Oak Creek when the spring floods washed out the footbridge. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd used his own wife's notary seal to sign away his mother's memory while I was sitting alone in the big front parlor. What do I do, Martha? I asked quietly. You don't call Julian, Martha said, her voice dropping into a tone of quiet, fierce authority that I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. If you call him now, he'll call his corporate lawyers, file a mental incompetency petition against you before the sun sets today, and freeze your personal bank accounts under the power of attorney authority. She reached beneath the counter, pulled out a private telephone directory, and flipped to a page highlighted in yellow. You call Detective Inspector Marcus Vance down at the Sheriff's Department, Martha whispered, pressing the paper into my hand. Marcus was your brother-in-law's partner for 15 years before he took over the Financial Crimes Division. He knows how these high-end land scams work, and more importantly, he knows what a forged notary seal looks like under a forensic microscope. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a small, windowless office on the second floor of the county courthouse. The air smelled of stale coffee, tobacco smoke, and old cardboard file boxes. Across the oak desk sat Detective Inspector Marcus Vance. He was 58, broad-shouldered, with a cropped head of iron-gray hair, wearing a dark green wool jacket over an open-collared shirt. He looked less like a police officer and more like a timber cruiser who had spent 30 years walking rugged ground. Marcus listened without interrupting as I laid out the agricultural tax form, the certified copy of docket 2026B that Martha had pulled from the vault, and the paper trail showing the $2 million mortgage release. When I finished, Marcus didn't say a word for nearly a full minute. He picked up the copy of the power of attorney document, brought it under his desk lamp, and examined the black notary stamp with a jeweler's loop. It's clean work, Howard, Marcus said, his deep voice grumbling like heavy machinery over gravel. Brenda used her official state notary commission stamp. She registered the log entry in her mobile ledger under a fake transaction number dated 4 weeks ago. On paper, you walked into her downtown office, produced your driver's license, signed the power of attorney in front of 2 witnesses, and handed over control of the farm. I was 40 miles away in West Liberty that afternoon, Marcus, I said, my voice steady as concrete. I was helping Arthur Pendleton rebuild his tractor shed after the windstorm. I've got gas receipts, store invoices, and 3 neighbors who saw my truck parked in Arthur's driveway from noon until dark. Marcus tapped the edge of the document against his desk. That's your alibi, Howard. And it's a good one, Marcus noted, leaning back in his leather chair. But in a civil court, a forged power of attorney contest can drag out for 2 years while the bank's legal team ties up the land title. By the time a judge rules the signature fraudulent, Julian's investment firm could liquidate the timber rights, strip the topsoil, and default on the $2 million mortgage. Then how do we stop him? I asked, leaning forward across the desk. Marcus leaned in close, his gray eyes turning cold as flint. We don't fight this in civil probate court, Howard, Marcus said softly. We turn it into a criminal wire fraud and notary forgery investigation. Under State Statute 404, using a state notary commission to execute a fraudulent real estate transfer over $100,000 isn't just a civil dispute, it's a Class 2 felony carrying a mandatory 10-year prison sentence. Marcus pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and picked up his pen. Julian and Brenda didn't just take out a mortgage, Howard, Marcus explained, his tone dropping into a calculating, tactical register. They used a shell company registered under Brenda's maiden name, Apex Asset Holdings LLC, to route the $2 million through a regional commercial bank downtown. To secure that loan, the bank required an updated, certified land survey plat signed by a licensed county surveyor. I froze. My surveyor's mind kicked in, the schematic assembling itself behind my eyes in an instant. A land survey plat. I breathed. Exactly, Marcus smiled grimly. Julian needed a surveyor to sign off on the 42 acres to prove the timber value matched the mortgage collateral. And guess whose forged professional seal he stamped on the bottom of that survey plat 3 days ago? My blood turned to pure ice water. Mine, I whispered. He used my old county surveyor's seal. He did, Marcus confirmed, shutting his notebook with a sharp, heavy thud. And that, Howard, is where your son made his fatal mistake. Because forging a state law enforcement or county surveyor's professional seal on an official property record isn't just land fraud, it's a direct federal offense that triggers an immediate multi-agency search warrant. Marcus looked at his watch, then pulled his private encrypted phone from his jacket pocket. It's 10:15, Howard, Marcus said calmly. Julian and Brenda are hosting an exclusive investor appreciation luncheon at the Grand Regency Hotel downtown at 1 o'clock today. They're introducing their new commercial development plan for the Oak Creek Valley to 16 high-net-worth private investors. I looked at Marcus. What kind of development plan? Marcus flipped open a manila folder on his desk and turned a glossy marketing brochure toward me. On the cover was a high-resolution digital rendering of my grandfather's 42 acres of timberland, stripped clean of trees, paved over with asphalt, and covered in rows of high-density luxury condominiums labeled Oak Creek Estates. They're selling shares in your farm today, Howard, Marcus said quietly. They've already collected $600,000 in private investor deposits. I sat in the quiet office, looking down at the digital picture of my land covered in concrete. The grief that had been weighing on my chest all morning suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, quiet, absolute stillness. Marcus, I said, putting on my canvas hat and standing up from the chair. How long does it take to pull an emergency federal search warrant for professional seal forgery? Marcus grinned, a hard, terrifying flash of white teeth. If I call Special Agent Sarah Jenkins over at the State Bureau of Financial Regulation right now? Marcus asked, reaching for his phone. About 45 minutes. Just enough time for us to drive downtown and get front row seats for the presentation. The Grand Regency Hotel sat at the corner of 4th and Elm, its glass and steel facade gleaming against the damp November overcast. Inside the grand ballroom on the second floor, crystal chandeliers cast a warm, opulent light over rows of round tables draped in white linen. Soft jazz played through the hidden speakers, and the air smelled of roasted sirloin, expensive perfume, and warm champagne. 16 of the region's wealthiest private investors, men in bespoke suits and women in cashmere coats, sat sipping wine, eyeing glossy leather-bound prospectuses laid out beside silver cutlery. At the front of the hall stood a raised mahogany stage featuring a 9-foot projection screen displaying a high-resolution 3D flyover animation of Oak Creek Estates. Julian stood at the podium. He looked magnificent in a dark navy Tom Ford suit, a crisp white shirt, and a burgundy silk tie. He radiated polished, effortless confidence, the smile of a man who believed the world was a chessboard and everyone else was just waiting to be moved. Brenda sat at a small head table to his right, wearing an ivory wool dress, her dark hair pinned back with a pearl clip, reviewing subscription agreement forms on her tablet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed softly through the wireless lapel microphone, smooth as aged bourbon. "What you are looking at on the screen behind me is not merely a real estate development. It is a legacy project. 42 pristine acres of prime valley land, completely unencumbered, secured directly from the founding estate, ready for immediate infrastructure breaking in the spring." A wealthy older man in the front row raised his glass. "Julian, the title work on the timber parcel, is the environmental clearance fully recorded with the county tax assessor?" "Every single document has been executed and filed, Arthur," Julian said, offering a broad, reassuring smile. "Complete power of attorney, verified land assignment, and a certified structural survey plat completed by the county's former senior inspector himself. Everything is clean, clear, and ready for funding." Brenda smiled, picking up a pen to hand to an investor leaning over her table. Right at that exact second, the heavy double oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a loud, echoey thud. The soft jazz music seemed to choke. Several investors turned their heads in annoyance, expecting a late waiter or a hotel staff member. Instead, I walked into the room. I wore my heavy canvas work coat, my faded denim trousers, my work boots still carrying dried clay from the lower pasture, and my canvas hat held in my left hand. Walking 3 inches to my left was Detective Inspector Marcus Vance in his green wool police jacket, followed by 2 uniformed county deputies and Special Agent Sarah Jenkins of the State Bureau of Financial Regulation, carrying a red leather warrant folder. A quiet, confused murmur rippled across the tables. Julian stopped mid-sentence. His smile didn't disappear instantly. It faltered, twitched, and then hung frozen on his face like a piece of cracked glass. Brenda's head snapped up from her tablet. The color drained out of her face so fast her skin matched her ivory dress. "Dad," Julian said into the lapel microphone, his voice amplified across the surround sound speakers, sounding unnaturally loud and hollow. What are you doing here? This is a private corporate presentation." I didn't answer right away. I walked down the center carpeted aisle between the linen-covered tables, my heavy work boots making a firm, rhythmic sound against the floor. Every eye in the room followed me. I stopped 10 feet from the stage, right in front of the podium, and looked up at my son. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, flat, and absolute. "I hear you're selling my grandfather's land." A sharp, collective gasp went around the room. 2 investors exchanged shocked glances. "Dad, you're confused," Julian said quickly, switching off his lapel mic with a frantic flick of his thumb and stepping out from behind the podium. He hurried down the wooden stairs of the stage, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. My father has been dealing with some mild age-related memory issues since my mother passed. Dad, let's step into the foyer and get you some water." "I'm not confused, Julian," I said, holding his gaze without blinking. "And my memory is sharp enough to remember that I never signed a power of attorney form in Brenda's office 4 weeks ago." Brenda stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Howard, stop this right now. You don't know what you're talking about." Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, State Bureau of Financial Regulation, Agent Jenkins announced, stepping past me and holding up a gold shield alongside a red-bordered judicial warrant. "This presentation is officially terminated under State Injunction Order 104. All attendees are instructed to step away from the tables and remain seated." Panic erupted across the ballroom. 2 investors stood up, clutching their checkbooks, while an older woman gasped, dropping her wine glass onto the white tablecloth, where it shattered, spreading a dark crimson stain across the fabric. "What is the meaning of this?" an investor in a pinstriped suit demanded, standing up. We've already wired $200,000 in earnest money to Apex Asset Holdings. Your money is currently frozen in an escrow hold, sir, Marcus Vance stated, stepping forward and pulling a set of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Because Apex Asset Holdings was formed using forged notary credentials and a stolen professional land surveyor's seal. Julian backed up 2 steps, his eyes darting frantically toward the side emergency exit doors. Marcus, wait. This is a family misunderstanding. My father signed the land assignment. Brenda witnessed it. Brenda witnessed a lie, Julian, I said, pulling the certified copy of Docket 2026B from my coat pocket and laying it flat on the head table right in front of Brenda's tablet. You used my driver's license number from an old insurance policy. You forged my signature. And then Brenda used her official state notary stamp to certify a crime. Brenda looked at the paper on the table. Her lips trembled, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her pen onto the floorboards. Julian promised me. Brenda whimpered, her voice cracking into a high, panicky shriek as she looked at Marcus. Julian said his father agreed to the development. He told me Howard wanted to move into a retirement village downtown. I didn't know. I just stamped the ledger. You stamped a fraudulent power of attorney assignment on a 42-acre farm, Mrs. Miller, Agent Jenkins said coldly, stepping up beside Brenda. And under state statute 404, certifying a forged real estate conveyance over $100,000 is a Class 2 felony carrying a mandatory state prison sentence. Agent Jenkins turned Brenda around, pulled her arms behind her ivory dress, and clicked a pair of steel handcuffs around her wrists. Julian! Brenda shrieked, tears ruining her makeup as she was guided away from the head table. Julian, do something. Call the firm's lawyers. Julian didn't call the lawyers. He looked at his wife, then looked at me, his face pale, sweat breaking out across his forehead, his polished corporate posture completely shattered. Dad! Julian whispered, stepping toward me, his hands shaking. Dad, please, listen to me. I was drowning. The downtown commercial market collapsed last spring. My firm lost $900,000 on the riverfront leases. The lenders were going to foreclose on our house. They were going to disbar Brenda. I did it to save us, Dad. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised on 34 years of honest county wages, the boy whose broken wrist I'd bandaged in the tractor shed, the boy who had sold his own mother's memory to buy tailored suits and German sports cars. You didn't do it to save us, Julian, I said, my voice low, steady, and heavier than a granite survey marker. You did it because you thought an old widower sitting out on a farm wouldn't notice a line being drawn across his land. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. Howard Miller, Marcus said, stepping up behind Julian and grabbing his right arm. Julian Miller, you are under arrest for grand larceny, felony wire fraud, criminal forgery of a professional seal, and falsification of public records. Marcus twisted Julian's arm behind his navy suit coat and snapped the second pair of steel handcuffs tight around his wrists. Click-clack. Julian didn't fight. He didn't scream anymore. He stood in the center of the grand ballroom under the crystal chandeliers, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies, surrounded by 16 wealthy investors who were staring at him with pure disgust, his head hanging low as his hands were bound behind his back. As the deputies guided Julian and Brenda down the center aisle toward the ballroom doors, Julian stopped beside me for a brief second. Dad! He choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. What's going to happen to the farm? I looked my son straight in the eye, adjusted my canvas hat on my head, and spoke with the absolute clarity of 34 years on solid ground. The farm is going to stay right where my grandfather put it, Julian, I said. And tomorrow morning, I'm going out to the lower pasture to cut firewood. The legal machinery of the state doesn't care about family dinners, shared holidays, or memories of a boy learning to split cedar logs behind a woodshop. Once a federal wire fraud warrant is executed and a state notary commission is revoked for felony forgery, the legal process grinds forward like a heavy stone wheel, slow, cold, and utterly indifferent to tears. Over the next 4 weeks, the quiet routine of my life in Oak Creek Township was punctuated by the steady arrival of official notices, process servers, and forensic accountants sent by the State Bureau of Financial Regulation. Julian's commercial investment firm, Apex Asset Holdings LLC, was forced into immediate court-ordered receivership. When federal examiners audited the company's digital ledgers, they discovered a paper trail that exposed 3 years of systematic fraud. Julian hadn't just defaulted on his commercial riverfront leases downtown. He had been operating a classical pyramid structure, using new investor deposits to cover high-interest short-term loans while staging elaborate slide presentations to keep wealthy creditors from filing civil judgments. He was facing 14 federal counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy. His defense team attempted to petition for pre-trial bail, citing his lack of prior convictions and his standing in the regional business community. But the presiding judge, having reviewed Special Agent Sarah Jenkins's affidavit detailing the forged county surveyor's seal and the stolen power of attorney assignment, denied bail entirely. Julian was remanded to the county detention facility to await formal trial. Brenda's legal trajectory moved with swift, devastating precision. The state secretary's office immediately revoked her notary commission, permanently blacklisting her from legal and financial practice in the state. Facing a Class II felony indictment for certifying a fraudulent land assignment over $100,000, her attorney negotiated a formal plea agreement. In exchange for a complete, unreserved confession detailing how Julian had forged my signature using an old insurance document and how she had stamped the notary log without my presence, the prosecutor agreed to drop the federal conspiracy charge. She was sentenced to 3 years at a minimum security state correctional facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and full restitution of court costs. On a cold, gray Tuesday afternoon in early December, exactly 4 weeks after I'd walked into Martha Gable's office with a simple tax form, Julian's court-appointed public defense liaison called my landline, asking if I would be willing to meet with my son in a private consultation room at the county facility before his transfer to federal custody. I almost declined. 34 years of surveying land has taught me that when a boundary corner is lost to erosion or a monument is deliberately destroyed, you don't rebuild the fence on top of shifting sand. You mark the true line, plant the steel pin, and walk away. But Sarah's voice echoed softly in the quiet back rooms of my mind, the voice of a mother who had spent 36 years hoping her son would grow into an honest man. I drove my '04 pickup truck down to the county seat, the heater humming softly against the winter chill. The consultation room was small, cold, and smelled of stale floor wax and commercial disinfectant. Julian sat on the far side of a scarred oak table, wearing a faded orange county jumpsuit. His hair, always so carefully gelled and groomed, was unwashed and hanging flat over his forehead. His face was pale, thin, and lined with dark circles around his eyes. He looked up when I stepped inside, his hands trembling slightly inside the heavy wrists of his sleeves. "Dad," he whispered, his voice raspy and thin. I sat down in the wooden chair across from him, resting my hands flat on the oak table. "Hello, Julian," I said quietly. "Dad." "I didn't want to destroy the farm," he choked out, burying his face in his calloused palms as tears began tracking down his cheeks. "I swear to God, Dad, I never wanted to sell the timber to strangers. The lenders were threatening to freeze our personal accounts. They were going to sue us in open court." Brenda was terrified. I thought if I could just get the $2 million bridge loan, I could turn the riverfront leases around, pay off the mortgage before the spring assessment, and return the title to your name without you ever knowing. I looked at my son across the narrow wooden table. "Julian," I said, my voice low, steady, and clear as a mountain spring. "You didn't forge my signature to save a riverfront lease. You forged my signature because you spent 8 years believing that a tailored suit, an expensive car, and a high-floor office downtown made you superior to the man who paid for your clothes with 34 years of mud on his boots." Julian didn't answer. He couldn't answer. "You thought because I sat out on 42 acres cutting my own firewood and keeping my mouth shut that I was a fool who wouldn't notice a line being drawn across his soil," I continued softly. "You thought my love for you was a weakness you could leverage to pay off your debts." "Dad, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking into ragged gasps. "What am I going to do?" I'm 36 years old. My career is over. Brenda is going to prison. I've lost everything. I stood up from the wooden chair, buttoning my heavy canvas work coat against the room's draft. You haven't lost everything, Julian, I told him, looking down into his bloodshot eyes. You still have your life. And when you finish serving your sentence, you'll have the opportunity to learn what it actually means to earn an honest dollar on solid ground. But the gates to Oak Creek Farm are locked. I didn't wait for his reply. I turned on my heel, walked out of the consultation room, down the concrete corridor, and out into the crisp December air. By mid-January, the winter snow had fallen heavy and thick across Oak Creek Township, blanketing the upper pastures and the red cedar barn in a clean, spotless coat of white. The land was completely quiet. Detective Inspector Marcus Vance drove up the gravel driveway on a bright, sunny Saturday morning, bringing a thermos of hot coffee and a leather-bound folder from the County Land Registry office. We stood together on the wraparound porch, watching the smoke rise from the brick chimney into the cold blue sky. The title is completely cleared, Howard, Marcus said, handing me an official certified copy of the County Land Register bearing a red seal. Docket 2026, B has been formally expunged from the state records. The fraudulent mortgage lien held by the commercial bank has been voided by court order, and the county tax assessor has officially reinstated your agricultural exemption. I took the paper, holding the heavy parchment in my hands. Thanks, Marcus. For everything. Don't thank me, Howard, Marcus smiled faintly, taking a sip of his coffee. Thank your grandfather for planting those cedar boundary posts 4 feet deep in solid granite. Fraud can buy expensive paper, but it can't move granite. After Marcus drove down the lane, I put on my work gloves, picked up my double-bit felling axe from the porch, and walked down the snow-covered path toward the lower pasture. The 42 acres stretched out before me, silent, unencumbered, and vast under the winter sun. The old black walnut trees stood tall and strong against the hills, their heavy branches holding the weight of the snow without bending a single inch. I reached the edge of the timberline, set my feet firm on the frozen earth, raised the axe over my shoulder, and brought it down into the heart of a fallen oak log. Crack! The clean, sharp sound of seasoned wood splitting open echoed across the quiet valley, ringing out pure and clear through the cold afternoon air. I leaned on the ash handle of the axe, took a deep breath of the freezing pine-scented air, and looked out over my grandfather's land. The line was drawn. The boundary was secure. And the ground beneath my feet was completely, undeniably unbroken.